Hello, I'm Tom Wilkie, and welcome to Grafana's Big Tent, the podcast all about the people, community, tools, and tech around observability. I'm here with Manoj Acharya, who is our VP of Engineering for Observability at Grafana Labs, with Cyril Tovena, who is a Principal Engineer on the Grafana Assistant team, and Spiros Xanthos, Founder and CEO of Resolve AI. Thank you, all of you, for joining. So, hey, Spiros, how's things over in California?
Things are great. The weather is nice. But too much work. I don't know if you know, this is my first startup. I never worked this hard before.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming. I didn't realize this was your first startup. I thought there was one pre-Splunk.
Fourth startup.
Oh, fourth startup. Yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah.
By the way, I was saying thanks for inviting me. Big fan of your work and the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, no, we're big fans as well. So, welcome. And Manoj, you're also in California somewhere, aren't you?
I am. I'm not too far from Spiros, and so I live in East Bay, which is about 30 miles east of where Spiros is.
But you work from home, so...
Yeah, thanks to Grafana, and even warmer weather than even San Francisco.
Oh, is the East Bay nice? Oh, nice. East Bay's nice. Very cool. Yeah, and I guess you don't have the morning commute problems. I'm currently in South Africa on a little holiday with my wife, and it's like, I don't know what it is in freedom units, but it's like 25 degrees C outside. It's absolutely beautiful, bright blue sky. It's lovely. Cyril, lastly but by no means least, you're in the south of France somewhere, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to stay close where the wine is the best.
Yeah. And the wine in South Africa is quite nice.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about South Africa. I was talking about California.
Oh, okay. I think that's something we can agree on. I went to Franschhoek yesterday. The day before yesterday in South Africa, and it's all French wine. It's all French grape varieties, French, everything around there's all French. I think there was some, colonial past there.
Nice. Did you like it?
Yeah, no, the wine was lovely. Yeah, are you going to be on your best behavior? Are you going to not have any words we have to beep out today?
I think we'll be fine. I'll try to stay away from the focus word. I think you like
exactly. Yeah. For those that aren't familiar, the first episode we had Cyril on, I think got a few complaints because focus sounds different in his French accent. But hey, so today we are talking about agentic AI and observability, and more specifically about automated root cause analysis, right? Because there's so many use cases for agentic AI and observability. My first question is really kind of for you, Spiros. Like you mentioned, you started this new company, Resolve AI. What's the Resolve AI story? What's this all about?
Yes, like you folks, I worked for a long time in observability. Started 2 Commons before, a log analytics platform who got acquired by VMware. And then Mayank and I, who's my co-founder here, co-created OpenTelemetry in 2018 and built a company around it. We ended up getting acquired by Splunk. And then there I also ran a pretty large software engineering team and a production system. And saw like firsthand the other side of the equation, right? What happens when you need to do that? And my realization was that despite, let's say, unlimited access to our own tools, we didn't have to worry about the cost. The majority of our time at scale was actually spent in running and debugging and maintaining the system. So Mayank and I, 2 years ago, decided maybe to try to think what is the way to do this in an AI-first way. Essentially trying to build agents that are not trying to replace the existing tools, but rather work alongside humans in using these tools to, let's say, improve reliability of production systems, starting with obviously being on call and being able to troubleshoot when something goes wrong. And, that's kind of the origin story. We've been doing it now for a while. I do believe it's a very hard problem, but it's also something that is essential, especially in the era of AI coding, where we're going to be producing a lot more software, and we definitely need the assistance of AI in running it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Like, I get the question a lot from our customers at Grafana Labs, like, is agentic AI going to mean I can hire fewer engineers, right? And I definitely feel like the answer is no. Like, no. We're going to just be making so much more software that hopefully maybe, we can run it with agentic AI at least, and not have to hire loads of people to run the software.
The answer is more AI.
Yeah, definitely. Cyril, you were one of the original engineers writing the Grafana Assistant, which has some overlap here. But you've a very different founding story for the Assistant, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, it was. I was actually telling Matt because we were using a lot of Cursor, so we really like using Cursor at the time. It was a year ago, and Cursor was a really good coding agent. And we were quite impressed by the fact that it was well integrated into your IDE. And because it was well integrated in your IDE, we had like enough context, and it was able to help you on the task. And so we had this. I had this idea. I actually pitched it like many times to Matt. I was like, we should do cursor for Grafana. And at first, I think I pitched that idea to many people. They were not really understanding what it was meaning. But then we did a hackathon with like a couple of people in the team that are still part of the team now. And the assistant came out, and it was a great success. So pretty happy about the results so far. The key here is that by using AI, we basically realized, how you could, apply the same technique from another field into the observability field. And I think that was what helped us break through.
Spiros, it sounds like you set out with the idea to automate a lot of the root cause analysis and incident response, using AI. Is that correct? Am I understanding that?
Yeah, that's correct. Because, in our case, we're starting from scratch in some sense. And, in my view, observability has evolved quite a bit and is much more useful, right? So we have all the data in place at this point. I don't think, yet another observability tool will help us become better in some sense, right? Better integration obviously helps, but what our thesis was that all this data is in place, but humans are, let's say, the operators. It's one of these tools. Oftentimes you have multiple tools in place, right? Even multiple observability tools, but of course, tools outside of observability that you use to troubleshoot, right? You obviously need to consult code. You need to understand infrastructure. You need to understand changes. So our thesis was or our view of the world was that humans, let's say, are the operators of each of these tools, and they're also the glue on top, right? And, that's what slows us down and makes it very, very hard, and oftentimes requires tens of people coming together to debug a problem. So we wanted to build, let's say, agents that, let's say, become the operators of these tools and are as good as humans, and also they become the glue across them, right? And maybe that's the difference also in us doing it as let's say, a non-observability vendor, because we can connect to all the tools, let's say, potentially that might be in place.
I actually have a question for you, Spiros, related to that. You said that we don't necessarily need a new database. If we look at all the database that exist, whether it's like Splunk or Elasticsearch or Loki, all of those database, what do you think they are well equipped for the new age of AI that is coming?
That's a good point. Yeah, I meant we don't need one more of these databases. So it's a good distinction. I do think that we see that the existing way, like all these tools were built for humans, right? So when it comes to agents using them, they have limitations oftentimes, right? Like maybe the throughput is not there, maybe the API access is not there, right? So I do think these tools have to evolve, right? And in my opinion, there is a huge opportunity for observability, let's say, tools to become agent first, and in fact, become even more powerful, more important, more relevant in the era of agents, right? But also, if they don't evolve, they might become the bottleneck, and they might be sidestepped, let's say, by agents as a result. I definitely, I agree with the idea that these need to evolve, right? I didn't mean that. I meant more that we don't need necessarily more data, right?
That's fascinating. Manoj, I want to bring you in here because your startup from a few years ago took a very different approach to automated root cause analysis, right? Was not, at the time at least, not leveraging LLMs as far as I recall. And so, it sounds like we've got two approaches here already. Like Spiros set out to build an agentic root cause analysis. I think the root cause analysis capabilities of the Grafana Assistant almost emerged from the hackathon, not, somewhat not intentionally. But yeah, Manoj, tell us a little about the knowledge graph and what you were working on.
Yeah, so just a quick, the origin story of the idea itself, right? I was in a company called AppDynamics for 10 years, built APM product and found that there's just too many signals. It's just scattered around. And, a human like me or my engineers had to sit there and link stuff, right? This is linked to that is linked to this. So that's where that idea of the knowledge graph came about, right? I read the paper from Google back from 2012, 2013. And then I said, okay, this thing can be applied to observability data. And then, so we started our own journey with 7 of us as an early stage startup. And then it was like, okay, so everybody's going to start using the open source data collectors. And in that world, the data is kind of labeled, but not perfectly labeled. So what if we could take that, whatever is the intelligence or the knowledge that is already encoded into the data, and transfer that into a graph database. So essentially, this is pre-LLM world, right? I'm talking 2020.
Yeah.
LLMs have not arrived, in its current shape and form, but you could still reconstruct the scattered data into a graph database, and then you can ask all kind of interesting questions, because there are very powerful graph algorithms that already exist about centrality and and if you know what everybody is calling a service or a database, and then that database is the service is having trouble, then it's likely the root cause, So that was kind of the genesis and origin of the product itself.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Spiros, do you take any of these concepts in Resolve? Do you have the concept of a knowledge graph? How are you handling that?
Yes. So I think this applies actually today. What Manoj was describing, in my opinion, applies in the era of, let's say, agents, models, and tool calling. Because, when you're dealing with a production system, first of all, production systems are not documented. Or let's say, rather, documentation lives in tools, human minds, and documents that are often outdated, right? So it does help to have, let's say, a context graph, as it's called these days, or a knowledge graph, that tries to tie these things together, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, in my opinion, but it gives something that the agents can use to reason about dependencies, about changes, about, what might affect a problem that you see, let's say, a user might be experiencing, but might be deriving from a database that are maybe 3-4 steps down. So Resolve tries to essentially reconstruct that context graph, let's call it, and maintain it offline, but also, the agents have the ability to, let's say, navigate the production system in real time and, have these paths created as the agent reasons about problems or tasks.
I think something Manoj touched on there, and I think Cyril also mentioned it as well, is knowing, these models knowing how to access the data, right? Manoj with the knowledge graph, curates a lot of that, and what we found with the Grafana Assistant is a lot of the foundation models from the big vendors already know how to use our software, already know about open telemetry labels because it's in the training set for them, right? They know about open source, they know about PromQL, they know about LogQL, they know about these kind of capabilities. So we tend to, we Grafana Labs here tend to go around kind of saying open source is our secret weapon when it comes to AI, because we haven't had to build any of our own models. These foundation models know how to use our software. Bingo. I don't know, I am definitely a layperson in this space. Spiros, does that sound reasonable, or how would you poke holes in that?
I think it's reasonable. I mean, in a way, maybe PromQL is a hard thing for humans to use, but it's now maybe an easy thing for models to use because they have seen enough of it. And I think it's the right way, in my opinion, is to ask a model or an agent to do what you want and construct a query. But I think this is where the context comes into play. The naive way, in my opinion, to build agents that try to query existing systems is, by giving them access to the systems directly, right? But then what happens is they will end up overwhelming the underlying system, right? You cannot go and try to take all the logs out of Loki or Splunk or a system like this because it's practically impossible, right? If code might be finite, so an agent can see all of it, but logs are practically infinite, right? In a period of a day or a week. So yeah. This context in the graph helps, and I think it's essential for being able to write precise queries and, retrieve the data that you actually need to debug a problem.
You mentioned that Resolve AI sits atop of a lot of, databases and observability platforms, Grafana Cloud obviously being one, but not the only one, right? How do you deal with the differences between the platforms, and how do you, for want of a better term, teach your agents to access, data that's fundamentally, a different shape or a different query language? How are you handling that problem?
To your point earlier, although let's say a lot of maybe the way you query these systems is in a training set, the actual debugging of problems is not, right? So this makes it a very, very hard problem, right? We had to do a lot of work on top of the models. And in fact, we think of Resolve as a full stack company, right? That builds both agents and models to deal with the problem, because we hit the limitations of what you can do sometimes with the frontier models. But, to your point, I think we have essentially designed agents that understand logs. And within that category, let's say, there are agents that can query, let's say, the different log implementations in databases, right? So there is that kind of two-level abstraction. And then we give these agents tools as well to analyze the data. And the same applies to code, applies to metrics, applies to infrastructure. And, in a way, a lot of the work we have done is in being the operators of these tools that are slightly different, but also being the glue across them, right? We have spent a lot of time in creating kind of reasoning and planning and, even memories, so that when we repeat a task, we're much smarter next time. So I would say that's a lot of the technology we have created, but also a lot where the value of this comes, right? Because if you have, oftentimes as a human, you have to go query all these systems. It's hard to remember the prompt call query to run, right? Or SPL query to run. And then, that's just the first step, right? Then you need to take all this data, analyze it, and connect it, right? So I think agents do that quite well.
I had a fun fact about what you said about PromptQL and the knowledge from LLM frontier model. We recently discovered, so there was one user that wanted to use native histogram. It's quite new feature in Prometheus, and actually doesn't perform at all very well with it because I guess the cutoff date is close to when it was. That was way more challenging for sure for us to actually make the model understand native histogram for sure.
By the way, this is where you can supplement what's in there, obviously, right? Like, I think models have become quite good at following examples. If you give them enough knowledge, usually they're good at it, right? I'm oftentimes very impressed, by the way, right? Like, we use Grafana tools ourselves internally. And, there was a point in time, let's say probably sometime 6 months ago, where people stopped querying these directly usually, and they go through Resolve when they want to query this. Even outside of debugging, let's say, right? Like somebody wants to get maybe some data out. And I think that was my realization where I think, there's going to be definitely a kind of a production abstraction layer on top of all the tools, right? That, kind of humans manage rather than maybe knowing the specifics of the language most of the time, at least.
That's one thing that we see with customer when we have a sales cycle is that it's very overwhelming the amount of knowledge that you have to learn to be able to use all those tools. And I think it's even more complicated in the open source because there's so many different tools that are different and there's subtle new language that you need to learn. And people don't necessarily want to learn a new language. So I think AI is kind of interesting in that space where they don't necessarily they know about the concept of like what is a metric. They don't necessarily want to be able to learn about PromptQL and all the complexity of, some queries can be quite complex, to be fair. And I think that's what is magical here is that it removes a lot of burden on the SREs and the engineers to know about those languages and to onboard very quickly on those tools.
I have two more observations along the same lines, which is one is that the other side of this is also hard, right? Let's say you craft the query, you get the data back, then it's not easy to kind of try to spot, let's say, anomalies, right? Even if you're very good at crafting a query, right? Or understanding like how to cluster data together, right? So I think LLMs with the right tools can do that very well as well, right? And maybe the other realization I had is, as somebody who works in observability and always thought, right, like say consolidation of data maybe helps is, I think LLMs probably or agents now allow us to maybe use the best database, the best tool for the data. And then they are becoming the connector potentially, right? Like, so maybe they enable maybe best of breed kind of architectures as well.
Yeah, almost like a anti-consolidation argument. Correct. No, I like that. You mentioned, Cyril, you talked a bit about like some of the challenges we see with customers. One of the things I've always thought about this is like observability tools, our audience, our users, our SREs, like DevOps practitioners, right? People, systems engineers, right? These are people who, in my experience at least, are some of the most AI skeptical engineers out there, right? Like they're the ones who really like want to ignore it, hope it goes away. So yeah, like as an observability company, Cyril and Spiros, like I still think you're, observability or observability adjacent. Like, how are you winning over those hearts and minds? Like, I'll go for you first, Spiros.
So, it is very true, right? Like, I almost think that agents that work in production is harder than code because oftentimes you're dealing with a high pressure situation, right? Like you don't have the time to ask the agent, hey, do this again, right? You made a mistake. So it's, the other kind of maybe example I have is like self-driving cars, right? You don't trust the car to drive for you unless it drives a lot better than you do, right? And, kind of you have proven it for you, right? So the way we think about Resolve is we do think that the right form factor for a tool like this is not like a black box that, you give it an incident, an alert or a question, and then spits out an answer on the other end, right? We think it has to be something, maybe akin to how we use, let's say, coding agents like Cursor or Claude Code that you work with, right? Accelerates what you do, maybe improves some TTR every time you use it, and whether it takes you the right answer or not, right? And it's very important for these agents to know as much as possible, right? If they have high confidence in the evidence in their answer, they should always cite everything they found, right, to ground the truth. And if they don't have the answer, they should give you all the work they've done, and then, ask you what's the next step, right? The way maybe another engineer you've been working with will do it, right? And we found that that's the right form factor to make AI in production work, because then humans trust it and can use it every time, right? And it doesn't mislead them.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it's definitively interesting, because I feel like it's a bit the same as any other tech, where you have early adopters and laggards, and obviously laggards are much more skeptical, and early adopters are like hyped. This is the best, and I think where it makes a big difference is the accuracy and the trust that the engineer have. What I've seen, because I've built a lot of different agents and a lot of features, and I failed, a lot with product, and I realized that usually how you convince those skeptical is by quality. If it is really good, then usually you definitively will get them to understand the value. The problem is that I think in the AI space there's a lot of slope software, and there's a lot of hyped software, and so it's very easy for them to try something and then they realize, well, this is just actually wrong answer, and they automatically assimilate that all the product will be the same. All AI product will technically be the same. And I kind of agree with you, Spiros, on grounding truth. I found this technique to be quite nice, to always ask the LLM to cite his finding, because if you don't, then it's definitely going to hallucinate on an answer. Because that's the thing with LLMs, is they always want to answer.
They want to please you for sure, actually, yes. And by the way, one interesting observation I have, if you don't mind, Tom, like to what you're saying, Cyril, is that I've seen the same, right? As you said, there is a lot of slope. There is a lot of very difficult to build a demo, right? But I think I've seen the reverse by now, right? I would say in the last few months, I observed that when people tried to build something or tried a product that, and had a baseline, then it becomes easier for them to understand a good product in AI also, I would say, right? Because it's much easier to have if you have a baseline and you've seen, something that maybe was okay versus a product that works really well, right? And has the power that you need to get it to work right every time.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tom asked that question because we have a lot of skeptical at the beginning of AI, coding AI in the company. And I think the Claude Code moment was probably the moment where everyone was like, I think I get it now. And at the same time, you're right, we're getting more and more user of Assistant internally, because now they can relate to that story they had with coding, and they say, I can actually trust that tech.
I think I have a slightly related and contrarian view that I think humans are lazy, and if you make something easy for them, and they will work harder to make it work, right? So, I mean, I see that in myself, right? If I start seeing something working, I will work harder to make it work for me. And LLMs are definitely getting in the way. A good example is a classic feature that we had in our product is a knowledge graph search, right? You can add a search expression to find parts of it. So now we have given Assistant the schema of the graph. You don't have to build it in a wizard anymore. You can literally type it, it just works. So now they can tell it okay, when the alert happens, go look for this segment of the graph, right? They were doing it manually before, and now they can LLMs can do it for them. And so they will work harder to make it work, at least I'm seeing that.
I think there's a moment happening. I can remember 15 years ago when CI/CD was, a thing people talked about but didn't do. Right. And you had to, go and convince the grumpy old software engineer that having a server run your tests for you, or code review. My first professional software engineering gig, we didn't do code review, which looking back is how would you possibly let me work on software without having someone check my code? But I think agentic software engineering and agentic observability is going to follow a similar path. You're going to be a laggard, and you're going to be kind of ridiculed almost if you don't adopt and know how to get the best out of and put the time and effort in to learn these tools. I think I kind of agree.
By the way, I think I agree. And I think also it's happening a lot faster than maybe other things, other similar kind of transformations, right? My thesis at the moment is that, and I see this with Resolve, is that I think agents, let's say for observability and production, are going to be working as well as agents for coding. And in fact, it is a harder problem, right? So potentially the value here is more, considering all the software we have out there, right, exists, and all the new software we're creating now with AI, right? And I do think it's going to happen, or that breakthrough moment that you were describing as the Claude Code moment, I think it's going to happen sometime this year for, let's say, AI that is working in production observability.
I was about to say that I think what's interesting is also at the pace at which the model are getting better. It's quite incredible. Like Opus 4.5 was a big moment for coding for sure, and I wouldn't be surprised that this year we're gonna get even better.
I'm going to jump about a bit just because, Spiros, what you brought up there about like the aha moment for agents in production, right? Like, how far out is it that like software agents run software for you, like fully autonomously, right? How far away is like removing the human from the loop? Or is that even the right question, right? And in particular, if that is the case, like, and we are going to get to software that basically runs itself, operates itself, like, how are you going to keep an agent like, accountable for an SLA violation? Like, what does that even mean, right?
Many questions in this, right? I'll give you my view of how the future might look like, a version of it at least, right? And I would say, how do you keep a human accountable also to some extent in mistakes, right? But I do think that what I see with Resolve, right? I think, when we started 2 years ago, people, were very skeptical of an agent in production at all, right? Or an agent working for the problem, right? I would say over the past year, that has been removed. I think like especially coding agents, paved the way. I think right now people are very comfortable, the agents doing the work, maybe the human having the final answer, let's say, right, reviewing. I think over the next probably few quarters, this next year, I do think we're going to remove, let's say, the need for a human to be in the loop, for the agent to take the final action potentially for debugging a problem or performing a task in production. I do expect like maybe even, let's say, the majority of kind of incidents that happen, maybe have an auto resolution by an agent by the end of the year. So in a way, like maybe by the end of the year, agents are going to be on par, let's say, in terms of abilities for this particular problem with maybe a senior software engineer, right? And we're going to trust them this way. But I do think that's not the end of it. Maybe in another year out, assuming the same pace of progress, maybe agents are going to start becoming, like you say, like start running production, right? Like maybe becoming this abstraction layer on top of the existing systems and tools, while maybe these systems also evolve to be agent friendly, and humans now manage these agents with goals more so that with tasks, right, specifics, and with having the final say, right? Maybe like 2 years out for something like this. And maybe if you play it out further, what might end up happening is essentially, maybe agents become, a lot better in specific tasks compared to like humans. And then the result of this, in my opinion, is a positive thing, right? Which is like we produce a lot more technology, we write a lot more software, we solve a lot more problems that are either expensive or difficult. And, we improve the world, in my opinion, as a result.
Yeah.
Of course, we have to be thoughtful on the way there and, the consequences. But I am an optimist in what I think happens next.
Yeah, I'm also quite optimistic about this. And I think it's already happening right now. We can see it in the coding space. Again, I like to relate to the coding space because it feels like it's a bit, just a bit in advance compared to the AI observability. And you can see now with those Ralph loop where, the agent is actually autonomously writing tests and then, going into the loop until the test is passing. So you can see that the autonomous and long running task is becoming more and more something real, which wasn't the case before. And so I do expect that. And I think this is the case for us. Like the end goal is definitively try to automatically, resolve incident. But I do think there's a path to that. You need to first kind of show to the customers that you can trust the software. And then once you are there, it will become definitively, clear that you can, also give access to, maybe, rolling back or changing your code directly. It's the same story that we had internally. I remember when we started using Cursor, we had a lot of people that were against, using background agent. But then with over time, with trust, it just became natural, and everyone is using now a background agent. So I think the fear of like giving access just gets removed slowly, as the quality gets better.
And I want to be the anti-AI maximalist here, like just to play that role for a second, like. This reminds me of like there was a spate of companies that would optimize your AWS bill. Right, that would come in and analyze the size of all your VMs and resize all your VMs to fit, like, and I'm not going to name names, but like I don't particularly think that sector was very successful, right? And in particular, not a lot of people trusted them to do that. I think it caused a lot of outages for many people. Like I can think of ones that happened to me, right? And and in general, like, yeah, it's kind of this accountability. Like this piece of software comes in, resizes, and breaks all your infrastructure. And what can you do? You not buy the software in the future, right? Like, that's the only recourse, right? So I do get the like building trust, and the human in the loop to begin with, at least arguments. But like, we've been down this road. Like, even how many, there's so many services, even at Grafana Labs, that we don't even auto scale at this point because like we don't need to generally, right? Like, it's so risky, and you can hold a human to account, right? You can hold them to account via performance management, via like coaching. There's various different mechanisms. Worst comes to worst, if they're causing repeat incidents, it becomes a horrible discussion.
Well, Tom, I think that maybe the difference between like the last generation of these technologies, like AIOps is another example in my mind, right? Like, as a concept, everybody obviously wanted it to be true. In practice, it wasn't, because we were limited by what was available, right? We could do some anomaly detection, we could group some things together, but in reality, it didn't like generalize well. I think the difference is that models can reason and generalize quite well, right? So they can essentially perform novel tasks oftentimes, right? Or, deal with uncertainty, or like criticize their own work, right? To validate as well, maybe as a human would. And maybe two real world examples I have, right? One is, I see customers now actually auto-approving code changes that the agent makes. Typically is infrastructure as code, that for simple changes, let's say add some capacity, right? Roll back a change, because they've seen it happening enough times, and now it's safe. Or I see myself, right, how much I trust my Tesla now to drive me to work every day. That wasn't the case 6 months ago. Now I don't pay attention, and I think that will apply to software, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're probably right. Well, that's an interesting segue, because what is the most kind of interesting, esoteric, like impressive incident that you have automatically root caused and maybe even resolved, like, without betraying any trust, obviously betraying any trust here?
I like, for me, I'll tell you, right, because we work with some very large, technology companies. I think the most probably interesting problems are things that I've seen many times, and I've seen some even in our own environment, where you usually have like a latent problem. Maybe there is a code change. Maybe there is something that changed in the environment. Maybe a load test running somewhere that actually has impact, probably after a little while, because it breaks something, it breaks slowly, and I think that's usually very, very hard for humans to dissect. Oftentimes maybe it's even a concurrency problem, right? Which by itself is very hard. And I think I've seen now, like over at least the last maybe few months, our agent becoming better and better in like removing the constant noise that exists in the background, and actually getting to these like, causality chains that are very, very hard for a human to troubleshoot. Like, maybe to give you a concrete example, because it was in our environment and I can share, is that we had, I think in October, November, this bug where somebody introduced a function that was calling a database to update something without deterministic log ordering. And then a few days later, we received a lot of events that made us spun up automatically like a bunch of pods to kind of process all these events. They all started hitting the database and created a deadlock, right? And, our team was trying to figure it out, what was going on. In the panic of moment, like, somebody started like debugging by themselves, and the result was running in parallel, and ended up like finding out this latent bug, right? That was 3 days later manifesting kind of as a kind of deadlock issue. And even like more impressively, what it did is like that code was changed actually multiple times from the moment the bug was introduced 3 days before. But none of the new changes actually changed the behavior, right? So it was able to dissect that as well. Anyway, I think that's just an example, right? Now, but also, like I said, I think it's very, very important to provide evidence, and if the agent doesn't have high confidence, to not try to say it does, right? Because it's in a similar way that this is impressive, it can also lead you down the wrong path very easily.
Yeah, the only example that comes to my mind, Tom, was like someone doing actually a demo into a customer environment.
Yes, I remember this one.
Yeah, you remember this one, yeah. And so the customer, as he was watching
we can't name the customer here.
Yeah, we can name the customer. But as the demo was happening of the Grafana Assistant, the customer suspected something was wrong in his environment, and then used the assistant to figure out that it was being attacked. So that was definitely interesting.
Yeah, and an emergent property as well, because we've never done any work, specifically in the security space, right? Like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was the interesting part.
I've seen this as well a lot. Like we didn't design Resolve to be used for security investigations, but I see like people using it all the time for things like this. And I think that is because which is the argument for kind of AI for prod almost, right? That goes beyond observability. Once you have these agents, essentially that can do a good job, like using the tools, right? And, connecting the dots across them. In reality, like many production tasks, right? Whether it's security engineering, or it's optimizing infrastructure, right? To your point earlier, Tom, actually kind of follow a similar pattern of reasoning, right? And I think agents do a pretty good job.
Manoj, what's the best kind of knowledge graph based RCA that you've witnessed?
Yeah, so I will cite one internal one and one from the customer. So the customer one is actually it's a highly asynchronous system, and they have built lots of topics and services talking to each other. And as you know, asynchronous systems, messages flying around, right? So every one is a unique flow. So this customer actually has taken the effort to encode the flows, flow 1, flow 2, flow 3 by different business domains. So what they were traditionally doing is they had a dashboard for every topic and every service. But now when the alert happens, they have linked that flow into the alert, right? So it automatically populates our RCA workbench, which is where we bring all the signals together. This is the classic knowledge graph. I'm talking pre-assistant, right? But now we have shown them Assistant. They are not rolled out to production yet, but they're super excited to almost double down on their pattern definitions, because it's very custom to them. There's no way we would know the business flows, right? But they're, okay, every time this alert happens, this engineers or this group of engineers will straight get an output from Assistant summarizing all the data that was previously shown in the workbench, right? And they can then determine should they dive in or it's not a big deal, So that I'm pretty excited about. Internally, the one that recently happened, Tom, is literally we had an incident and the team is literally launching Assistant, asking what changed recently, and that's working really well, right? So for example, I'm sure we have this thing called Kube Deflogger. We log all our Kubernetes events, interesting parts are already done inside Grafana in our own product. It's open source project. And we have transformed that into what you call as change events inside and feeding that to Assistant now. So people can instantly ask this guy a question, okay, because they know what to do every day, right? So now they don't have to go open that other dashboard and look for it. So that's working really well.
By the way, Tom, I have a question about for you about something related. Something that we've seen a lot with customers is that they usually have a lot of data and not necessarily querying that much. They just query a very subset. But with AI, it sounds like, more like apparently the blast radius of the queries, and because searching becomes faster. And so they're searching more and then searching wider. Do you think that is something that's going to change, how we, charge customer for querying, or like, what's your take on that?
This is something I wanted to ask Spiros as well. So this is kind of really interesting. We currently, queries in Grafana Cloud are free. You pay to store and ingest the data. You don't pay to query it. And we are seeing people, we believe it's from using the assistant and using systems like Resolve, doing orders of magnitude more querying than the economics of Grafana Cloud were built around, right? And we don't, one of the key principles of Grafana Labs is like openness, right? And it's your data, you own it. We're never going to stop you doing anything with your data. It's your data, but we have to cover the costs of these kind of things. So who knows? But yeah, I suspect we'll probably have to introduce some kind of query-based fees in the future, like maybe like a large, generous, fair usage amount for most people, but like for people doing particularly onerous query loads, maybe charge for that. We'll see. I don't know. Mean Spiros, is this something you're seeing across the industry? If you're integrating with lots of different, data providers.
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that, the way I see Resolve, the impact I see it having in observability is a positive one, right? Because effectively you have now this expert user of all the tools in place that anybody can access, right? So essentially, obviously there was always a prompt QL expert, right? And maybe there was somebody who understood, let's say, how to query metrics. And maybe they created dashboards and most people consume those, right? I think with an agent like Resolve, you can actually now essentially go to that and, satisfy every question you have without having to be an expert in the underlying tools, right? So in my opinion, is a net positive. Now, I do agree with you, right? Like I said, at Resolve, we try to be very careful and precise in how we use these tools. We don't want to overwhelm them. We don't want to be the reason we does them. But, oftentimes we do see that, they become a bottleneck. And interestingly, when we see that happening is usually when somebody has an on-prem deployment that they manage themselves.
Right.
And, they probably don't do a very good job, sizing that, right? So that and they're very conservative and all of that, right? I think I see it less with like Grafana Cloud, right? Or other similar like SaaS solutions that are, very well managed, obviously at scale. But I agree with you, Tom, right? I think this is an opportunity, in my opinion, for like the data systems, right? For like these systems of record to evolve, right? Because I think the value comes from how you use the data, not from what data you collect almost, right? So I think maybe the pricing model of the past where we managed by, charged by volume of data or by host managed, probably not be appropriate to our in the era of agents, right? Where they maybe become the main system that query this data, right? And I think these have to evolve. And I honestly believe it's a great opportunity if, let's say, companies who like Grafana who do this evolve, like I think they will become probably a lot more relevant and maybe, more powerful infrastructure for agents in the future.
Yeah, we hope so. But I mean, particularly for Resolve, Spiros, like, is there not a strategic risk here? Like that some of the other, the other vendors in this space kind of lock you out or prevent you from accessing the data? I mean, as I said, we're not going to do that, right? We're all about being open here, but
I think like I said, right? Like I don't think what Resolve does competes, right, with these systems. And I think there is a natural force here, right? Which is that obviously agents are inevitable, right? So if you're in a position where you end up becoming the bottleneck, I don't think that's strategically the right thing to do for any company, right? So even if it happens individually, I don't think, I think it's going to be a mistake for somebody who tries to do that. And I think because eventually they're going to be sidestepped by agents and might be replaced by other systems that are more open, right? And, from our perspective, we try to be good citizens, right? Like we are very, very careful to like how we use these tools, right? Like we want to use them the way we're designed and, almost like the way a human would use them, right? And of course, we hope that they evolve and become, let's say, the throughput becomes better, you can do things faster, etc., right? And I think the right way to do this is by evolving the pricing models, right? But I'm not as worried because, like I said, I think it's not a question of what any individual vendor does. It's a question of what the industry does, right? And I think what you described, Tom, is the future.
Yeah, I mean, we're not, our open philosophy at Grafana Labs is not, just out of the kindness of our own hearts. I mean, partially it is, but like it's also because it's a competitive differentiator for us, right? We think customers will choose our data platform because, they get to do with the data as they please, right? And because it's, more cost effective and more so on, right?
And, if this was important before, right? I think it's more important with agents, in my opinion, right? That's my point.
Yeah, I 100% agree. How are the economics of this? To be more specific, you always hear about like value-based pricing, right? We're talking about pricing. Like you always hear everyone wants to like charge you based on the value, or you want to charge your users based on the value you deliver to them. And then of course, pretty much everyone in the industry actually does cost plus pricing, like, charging them some percentage on top of how much they spend on Amazon to run these services. How are you thinking about those kind of things? How are you thinking about like capturing the value that something like Resolve is delivering?
A very good question, right? I think that, when agents perform tasks in production, there are some tasks actually that are very high value, right? Like if the agents materially improve your MTTR and reliability, that has a lot of value beyond the work they do, right? So I think that it's a combination of two things, in my opinion, right? It is a combination of, okay, are the agents solving a problem that actually helps improve the business, right? Results in more revenue or, revenue loss reduction. And in that case, I think there is room potentially to probably for, true value-based pricing, the way you're describing it, Tom, right? But also, I think these agents do a lot of work, right? And I think that work is replacing human effort. Or let's say we turn like this human effort into tokens, right? And I think that probably is closer to maybe like some more flat type pricing where, let's say, for every minute of work the agent saves, it charges you a lot less than what it cost for a human, right? And I think in that sense, agents become a no-brainer because probably they cost cheaper than the human equivalent effort. But also maybe they drive better outcomes, right, in terms of reliability improvement, cost optimization, etc.
I don't have a better answer, myself, but it's like one of those where I hate the idea that we're just going to transfer all the cost plus pricing models of, telemetry storage over to this new agentic world and do cost plus on tokens, basically. Like it just seems like an opportunity to do a lot better. But, we mentioned briefly those companies that did give us your Amazon bill and we'll save you a bunch of money by resizing it. That was the opportunity to do really good value-based pricing, right? Because you just charge a percentage of the money saved. But yeah, it just didn't, I'm just looking for that kind of aha moment of like simple to understand pricing that really like makes it easy to, to see the value, that you're delivering, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that makes this challenging, by the way, in observability in production is, let's contrast it with customer service as an example, right? Where you have agents that, deflect maybe customer requests, right? That's kind of very easy to do outcome-based pricing. I think in our case, obviously, production systems are very hard, very, lots of technical details. It is more difficult to have a similar, let's say, outcome-based pricing. Although that would be the ideal, right? Because then you say, okay, did I do this? And maybe in a year from now, we'll be there, right? And we can have like very kind of well understood like tasks that the agent performs completely without a human intervention. Today, the way we approach it is, mostly to think about the work the agent does. And, we get paid, let's say, when that work is performed, right? And it usually, saves a lot of human effort and results in better outcomes. But it's kind of in between. Let's say value-based and cost-based almost.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
For autonomous workload, I think that's where it's difficult, because when it's like a bit like Grafana Assistant, where you are actually prompting the system and you are asking question, I think it's pretty clear that that's going to be difficult to do based on just the value that you get, because the value you get is what you ask. And so, if you're asking the wrong question or making mistake in your prompt, then you're not going to get value. But in autonomous, where I think it's an alert that fire and then you're trying to, investigate the problem, I think it makes sense to try to do a value-based pricing. The only problem that I see is that, the value that, as an enterprise, providing that product and the value perceived from the customer is always going to be different. And I think that's where it's going to be difficult, because if you ask this customer, it's value-based, and, tell me how the value was on that agent, they probably will say, well, it wasn't great. I don't want to pay more. So I think that's why it's like a bit difficult. But I agree with you, Spiros. It should be, the ideal will be on value for sure.
Slightly different topic to pricing, and this is going well off the kind of pitch of this being a technical podcast. What are your customers telling you about data privacy? Because, we get a lot of skepticism from, I definitely am the AI skeptic in this conversation, get a lot of skepticism from especially European companies and adopting, the Grafana Assistant and technology like that, because they worry, I think, that some of their private telemetry data will leak into the training sets for future models, right? So what do how are you handling that, Spiros?
Yeah, so obviously we work with large enterprises, so we take, data privacy, security extremely seriously, right? And I think that's kind of almost like a non-negotiable. Probably you see that more in Europe, let's say, for various reasons. But I think, similar in the US, right? Like nobody's going to trust you unless they really trust that you handle the data properly, right? And we give strong guarantees that we're not going to train any model or with the data and etc. Now, I will tell you like two sides of this. Obviously, you're dealing with production systems, right? That oftentimes contain, sensitive data. I think the fact that, there are engineers and executives out there that are willing essentially to go do all the work it takes, right, to introduce an AI into a production system speaks about the value and the pain of the problem, right? And that's often what I tell my team, right? Like, it is obviously hard and difficult, and, going through security reviews and all of that is not easy for a problem like this. But if people are willing to do it, it means that, it obviously has a lot of value.
Yeah.
Now, for us as a vendor, I think we try to like have very clear separation of like data plane and control plane, give very strong guarantees, many layers of filtering and controls that the customer have. And I think kind of that's a prerequisite, right? But still, oftentimes we see that, people require maybe an on-prem deployment that is completely segregated, right? And I do think that, that's going to remain probably a consideration and something that vendors like us will have to support for at least very large or maybe very kind of regulated environments.
Yeah. Yeah, we're really, moving away from offering like self-managed software at Grafana Labs. Like the assistant is not available and probably will never be available, as a self-managed piece of software. So we're trying to focus on very different kind of answers to that question around like, oh, well, how about we run it? We operate it, Grafana Labs operate it in your Amazon or Google account, right? Like, a different approach, but it does scare,
I agree with you. Like, it doesn't mean that like, segregated environment means like, self-managed, right? Because I talked about all the problems with that.
I'm just trying to it's so hard to move quickly building software if, you've got customers running 18-month-old versions of it, right? Which has been my experience with enterprise software. One of the other kind of, things that makes me a bit nervous about all of this, right? Playing the role of like AI skeptic here is like, up until relatively recently, Grafana Cloud has had no ability to modify your state, right? It's been view only, right? Like we've basically given you really deep insights into what's going on, like, and, you know, back in time and, you know, but it's pretty much a read-only interface in terms of like, you know, telemetry signals and alerts and so on. You know, and this is kind of changing now when, you know, you can start to connect up MCP servers to Grafana Cloud and have it like put in code changes and so on. And it sounds similar in Resolve, right? And that, I don't know, like that scares the crap out of me, right? Like, you know, someone could potentially compromise our SaaS and then get into our customers' SaaS from there. Like, that's something where, you know, again, we take the security of Grafana Cloud very, very seriously, and we do everything, you know, humanly possible to, you know, to prevent that. But yeah, it's like, that's something that I worry about. Like, how are you, you know, I guess similar answer, right, to the last question.
I don't think it should be very easy for agents to mutate production systems, actually, right? I think that should go through some controlled process, in my opinion, right? Like the way we think about it is like, if it's a code change, obviously it should go through a code review and, you know, all of that, right? And maybe it should be also limited in what it changes, right? Or if it's a change to the production itself, it should probably be done through like a set of approved actions that have been validated in advance, right?
And preferably not by another LLM. Yeah.
No, not by exactly. And then I do think also that, you know, there is the notion of like maybe the agents should live in a sandbox also, right? At the moment they can start taking actions, right? And, you know, so we kind of control that completely and only take actions after they have been approved. I think, you know, I don't think we're at the point where we'll let, you know, agents run wild in production, right? If they take action, it's going to be a pre-approved action that is controlled. But, you know, the same concepts of privacy apply to all of the security questions as well.
I found that you're playing really a good role of skeptical for someone who is vibe coding his whole home automation using AI.
My house is my house is basically running itself now. Like an agent decides when to turn the heating on. I had this problem all along of like, you know, I get up at weird times of the day in various, you know, there's no set schedule for me, and like there's never hot water, and so now I've just left that, fed a calendar into an agent, and it just decides when to turn the hot water on. It's kind of cool.
Are you on the OpenClaw train, Tom?
The thing I just described was something I wrote myself. But I have got OpenClaw. Well, no, actually, sorry, I've got like an old Moltbot running. Old, like it's, you know, a week old.
Sounds like Tom trusts his own AI. He doesn't trust other people's AI.
Oh, I mean, I don't trust my AI. But if the worst it can do is no hot water or too much hot water, then like, you know, I'll catch that pretty quickly. So we talked about like how agentic AI has really revolutionized coding, and I think like, yeah, so to your point, like it's ahead of observability, but I think the consensus is also that it's on observability is on a similar path. So what's next? What's going to happen after observability and coding? Like where is this technology going to apply in our space next?
I think maybe because of the fact that, you know, we usually go across other tools that are outside of observability may have some things I see already, right? So in our case, like I was describing, we started by trying to improve reliability, MTTR, production issues, and all of that, right? But I think the moment the agent started working very well and reasoning very well about production tasks, we started seeing people using it for a lot of other things, right? To give you some like maybe well understood examples, right? People will use it to right size their infrastructure, right? And to your point earlier about this category of companies, I think agents can do a better job because what they can do is they can look at the data now, they understand pricing, then they can go back, you know, as long as they need to, look at telemetry, let's say, and understand the behavior of the system, right? Even correlate any potential production issues that happened to whether that caused, let's say, by maybe under provisioning. So that's one category of things that we see happening. Another category I would say is like maybe technical customer support, which touches usually the same type of data. It's something that ends up interrupting SREs developers quite a bit because they're often the ones who know the problem. I think, you know, agents can become of this in-between layer, let's say, that probably can answer most questions. It can enable somebody who's technical, let's say, but not an engineer to actually get the answer. One more category is probably like security engineering. I do think like the same transformation that's happening maybe in the NOC or in the DevOps world, it's going to happen in the SOC as well. Similar reasons, similar technology, similar concepts. And, you know, eventually, like I said, I do think like we're creating an abstraction layer above these tools. And, you know, over time, where also these tools evolve, let's say, right, to work better with this agentic abstraction layer.
And Manoj, any thoughts here?
Yeah, so I'm in the lazy category, as you know, Tom. So basically, I just want to create custom Claude skills, which will do all kind of re-architecture. Remember how the classic thing goes? You have SLO that breaches. Go back and figure out what to fix in engineering. I really, really want that closed loop there, right? Something that can look at my production data, look at my current architecture, and then start making recommendations on how to prioritize which backlog that could be sitting. I have too much backlog. We try to figure out, based on instincts and all that stuff, which is good, but something that can assist us there, right? So yeah, that would be my next frontier, I would say, almost like Alpha Zero, right? How it starts from scratch and just knows the stuff. Yeah.
I think there's also maybe the business intelligence where that is going to be, and it's already happening, revolutionized by AI, because it's a lot of executive or directors that need to ask a question, and they usually go to a data analyst to answer those questions. But I think all of this can be automated. I think this is probably a space that is even more dangerous because you can technically ask a question about how is my revenue going and get the answer directly. And so I think this is another space definitely where there will be definitely a lot of improvement over time. Maybe another one, if is in between. I feel like between code and observability, there's infrastructure. Infrastructure is like where you can use the coding agent right now. I think there is also a space where you could vibe code the deployment and automatically.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Like, just for your context, Spiros, we and I'm sure most companies do this now, but like we shove all of the code to generate the kube manifests in a single repo, right? And it's all in this language called JSONet, and the engineers hate it, but it is a superpower of ours because like we can do really complicated rollout strategies. We can roll out new regions. We can, everything is infinitely tunable in production. And it's incredibly powerful, and it gives us a huge amount of flexibility and being able to respond to instances, like just twiddle something in deployment tools. But yeah, I think config management is rife for disruption with agentic AI. Like, I think it's going to be completely replaced. Like, and the whole idea of like, turn this VM into something that can be reproduced, like, could just be handed off to an agent, right? Like, it's such an obvious and easy thing to do, right?
Well, by the way, I have a couple of data points to share. I think,
please,
about because I completely agree with what Manoj and Cyril said, right? Like, to Cyril's point about like maybe more business intelligence. I think oftentimes to answer these questions, you need to go back to technical data. And, what I've seen at Resolve happening over time, probably like 90% of the employees at Resolve use Resolve. And obviously, not everybody is an engineer, but I see like oftentimes our salespeople going and asking questions about what's happening in a customer's environment. Our PMs using Resolve, let's say, to maybe make a change in code to create a funnel in production, like for something they're tracking. Or, maybe like a customer service or customer support or solutions engineer going and trying to essentially understand like the behavior of the system or whether a feature flag is on without having to bother engineers.
Yeah.
So I do think that essentially the users are expanding as a result, right? And the use cases are expanding as a result. And we're eliminating layers in between that were necessary before. And maybe we're the bottleneck, right? Because if at the end of the day I need to go bother an engineer to run some query, I would be hesitant probably to interrupt them from what they're doing.
What's not being asked because they don't want to interrupt people. Very cool. So is there any last questions we should have asked, any last topics we should have brought up?
I have one question for you, Spiros. As you are an AI company, what is the AI software apart from yours that, you're using and you wouldn't never go back?
So you're saying the tools we use ourselves essentially to...
Yeah, whether it's coding or maybe for your own use case as an executive, like is there something that you really is like, you cannot stop using anymore?
I would say I think being a brand new company, right, allows us to essentially do AI first, a lot of things, right, which may be difficult for an existing company, right, like to retrofit AI processes. So obviously, I would say we have engineers now where 100% of their code is generated, right? That wasn't really the case 3 months ago, I would say, right? But now they iterate between, let's say, remote agents and their local agent, whether it's Claude Code or Cursor. They also use Resolve a lot. We also have now actually CLI. And people use it from their laptop. So a lot of the actions they take in production come directly from Resolve now. So Resolve becomes essentially the agent that kind of takes actions on their behalf in production. For at the higher level for me, I would say I'm always trying to see every time we're trying to perform a task and it's manual, why do we do that? And is there like an AI first approach we can take that maybe saves us time and, requires less effort, right? I think it applies to a lot of things, right? It applies to customer support, definitely applies to, let's say, legal reviews and all of the contract work that we have to do. It applies to your point about BI and how we kind of run the business and metrics and all of that, right? Yeah, I mean, I think Resolve probably will have a lot less people for the same level of, let's say, revenue success than probably like a current generation company had. Is it going to be 10x less, 5x less? I don't know, but it's definitely less.
Here's a controversial one for you. I use a lot of the LLM tools to do performance reviews, and I'm pretty sure my team are just putting them into an LLM to read them as well. So
yes, that's a classic joke about like, I used an LLM to write an email, and I used the LLM to summarize back essentially one sentence I intended to give you, right? Like I think that might be happening. But I also find LLMs as a feedback mechanism to be quite good, right? Like if I record something I'm saying or something, and ask, like it's quite good actually in giving you feedback. And I think maybe it's also a safe way for all of us, right? Whether you're, let's say, a junior engineer on call, right? And you don't want to, maybe you're afraid to go ask a question to somebody else, right? It's much easier to ask an agent, and and maybe similar to ask for feedback, for your own work, let's say.
The junior engineering point is interesting. As a remote company, right, we don't hire a lot of junior engineers because there's no one they can sit next to and kind of, bounce ideas off of in Grafana Labs. And I really think, as we get bigger, it's kind of our duty to hire junior engineers. And so maybe the agentic coding assistants become that rubber duck, right? Become that person that can, become that tool and technology that can enable us to hire more junior engineers. Who knows?
And I think, Tom applies to coding, but I think it applies to production, right? Because I think, let's say, you're now a junior engineer faced with a production issue that might take down, let's say, the system, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, you're starting with a cold start problem. Having like some guidance from an agent like this is probably very, very useful and helpful.
Tom, especially for someone who is not like native English, if I have to write my own review, I have the intent of what I want the review to be. But like writing it so it's not, nicely written for someone to read is taking me a lot of time, especially as a non-native English. Yeah. So using LLM for writing my review, I think, of course, yes.
Yeah, all of my writing is going through LLMs now. Anyway, I think that's probably all the time we've got for today. So I want a big thank you to Spiros, to Manoj, to Cyril for joining us. And thank you to listening. I will see you next time on Grafana's Big 10.